Hi, my name is Natalie, and today I'm going to be talking about Riordanverse. Now, some of you who have no idea what I'm talking about are going to ask Natalie, what the heck is Riordanverse? And that is exactly what I am here today to explain and talk about. Riordanverse is essentially every book written by an author named Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan is the author of many series, but most notably, Percy Jackson. Percy Jackson is not what I originally thought it was, and I'm going to be explaining that in this video as well. Riordanverse now is basically every book that falls under the domain of anything that takes place in the world of Percy Jackson. So it might not be directly about that character, but it could be any character that is in that world. The reason I'm making this video now is because Riordanverse is about to change, and we won't be able to call it anymore. Rick Riordan is going to be writing a new book, and it's not going to be taking place in the Percy Jackson world. So we have to make the Riordanverse video now and explain what it is before it no longer is that name. So here we are. One of my very first videos on this channel was explaining what the Lightning Thief is, and it was a non-spoiler review. So if you could please go watch that video, I would appreciate it a lot. Also, it would save some time in explaining the Lightning Thief in this video, which is the first book of the Percy Jackson series. So there's a quick plug for that. Please do that. Anyway, in Riordanverse, there are 3 main series that take place one after the other, and they all follow the characters of Percy and his trials and basically the Greek mythology. Percy Jackson and all of the books following it are about different mythologies, and mostly it's focused around Greek mythology, but Rick Riordan wrote a bunch of series that have different mythologies, and actually some of them are amazing. Personally, I love Magnus Chase. It's not part of the Percy Jackson 3 series kind of thing. It's kind of a spin-off series that's a different mythology, but it is very good. And again, it does take place in the same world as Percy Jackson. As I mentioned, there are 3 main series that follow one after the other. These 3 series are Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Heroes of Olympus, and Trials of Apollo. The last Trials of Apollo book just came out last October, and I am happy to say I have just finished reading it, and I know it's taken me a long time to finally get to it, but I must say that it was a very good conclusion to Riordanverse as it is right now, and I was very happy with it. Percy Jackson is one of those things that you go into, and it's not so much about the reading, it's about the journey you take, and you're going to hear me probably say that a lot in these videos. Percy Jackson is a journey. So I keep throwing that name around. Who is Percy Jackson? What is Percy Jackson? Let's start with the what first. Percy Jackson is a 5-book series. It's actually the shortened version for Percy Jackson and the Olympians. This series is comprised of 5 books that talk about Greek mythology, and it follows one main protagonist in the first person, Percy Jackson, which is short for Perseus Jackson. Percy is a demigod, as you learn very early in the series, and it's not a very big spoiler. It's basically featured around him and his life and what happens. Percy goes on a lot of quests to figure out different things about the world, and slowly you get to view more of the world as well. So you kind of learn mythology through Percy, which is a really cool way to tell a story. I personally find that one of the best ways to tell a story is when you, the reader, are learning along with the protagonist. I also find it very fascinating that Percy Jackson is written in first person. It really makes you feel like you're part of the story. I love first-person stories. As you might already know, I love to write, and I write pretty much exclusively in first person. I like this way of storytelling because it really puts you in the main character's shoes, because it's I, so it makes you feel like you are the I. But Percy is a very distinguished character. He's not like some other first-person novel people who were narrators, who are not very distinguished, where you don't know what they look like. Percy has a very, very tempered personality. He's very filled out, as all of Rick Riordan's characters are. I don't think there is a single character in any of the books that he's written that falls flat. There is no static characters. Every single character has a story to tell, and you quickly learn that as you go into the series. Now, I must say that the first book, The Lightning Thief, when I first started reading it, I told myself this is one of the weirdest things I've ever read. Now, that was a while ago, but it still is pretty strange. You get thrown into this world with monsters and demigods, and suddenly you're like, what the actual heck is happening right now? And it gets a little bit hard to place reality from the world that Percy lives in. The main setting of these books is Camp Half-Blood, and as you can see, I am wearing my Percy Jackson shirt that says Camp Half-Blood. Camp Half-Blood is where half-bloods, aka demigods, go to learn to be able to defend themselves from monsters. Now, I can't really say much more than this because this is kind of an overview and I want this to be as spoiler-free as possible. So that's basically your overview of what Percy Jackson is. It's about a boy who's struggling to find a place to fit in among the demigods and to figure out what his purpose is, because he certainly has a purpose to fulfill. Now, when people talk about Riordanverse, they usually just say Percy Jackson. It's kind of the throwaway name that people just throw into this, but it basically usually means more than just Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It usually is talking about Percy Jackson, Heroes of Olympus, and Trials of Apollo. Maybe not so much Trials of Apollo yet, but it probably will soon be covered under that bank. And also, it can refer to Rick Riordan's 2 spin-off series, which I haven't touched on yet, but I'm going to touch on now, which are Magnus Chase, as I mentioned before, which is Norse mythology, and the Kane Chronicles, which is Egyptian mythology. Both are amazing. Frankly, the Kane Chronicles was my introduction into Percy Jackson. It was my way of getting into the world. I didn't know what Percy Jackson was before I got into that book. I was completely confused on its concept. To be honest, I thought it was about a boy who was in the woods with a bunch of other kids and had to survive as like a woods runner, which I know sounds super weird. Probably I had read too much Giver and Messenger at this point, but that's what I thought it was about. It's definitely not about that. It's very much action-packed and adventurous, but in a different way. Whereas it's not running through the woods, which weird me thought it was. It's more so about quests and coming to understand the people that are in Camp Half-Blood, and there are other camps as well. As you find out in Heroes of Olympus, there's a whole nother camp called Camp Jupiter, and kind of both of those are big parts of the Percy Jackson Riordanverse series type thing and the world that you know. But all of these books take place in the same world. Think about it like this. If you are a lover of epic fantasy, you've got all of these different books that probably take place in one world, but they're different and separate from one another. This is kind of like how Magnus Chase is and the Kane Chronicles are to the timeline. They fit in perfectly. There's certain parts that do overlap and some characters overlap, though not tons. And there's other parts where they're completely separate and you don't have the same characters and you don't revisit the other worlds, but then at some point they do all connect. So it's kind of like the epic fantasy concept, but for children. I have to mention that these are all children's books because it just makes it absolutely amazing. And Rick Riordan is a very smart writer. He knows exactly what children want to read and even can apply it to older people like me and even older adults and, whoever. That it really applies to a wide audience, and all the lessons that are in it and even some of the references are maybe not so much for children, but are like those Easter eggs that are hidden in children's TV shows for the adults that have to watch with their children. They're there to supply as a kind of funny, uplifting moment. Also in Riordanverse, which is extremely impressive, there's an amazing balance of humor and deep discussion and dark moments. There's plenty of laughter, plenty of insane lines. Recently, in the last Trials of Apollo book, there's literally a part where there is a battle going on and people are dying like left and right in this one room. And this guy is struggling with his remotes and he's playing with them. And all of a sudden, ball comes down from the ceiling and it starts playing Staying Alive, and it's absolutely hilarious. And you're sitting there as a reader, laughing, even though at the same time you want to cry because there's a bunch of characters dying and you're sad. But Rick Riordan really tries to balance it out with the humor and the really deep discussion. And I just know that, like I said before, every character has something to say, and there's no character that falls flat. And I love this about Riordanverse because all of the characters in some way are relatable, and that's really hard to get in books. There's usually one character that you kind of latch onto, and that's your main character, and you don't really care so much about everyone, like you kind of do, but you really just want to latch onto one. And that's hard in a normal book, and in series, it's basically lost. You might love a group of people, but you definitely are going to have one character that you want the most to latch onto. In Riordanverse, it's not like that. It's more so that you are your character in this world, and you are latching onto everyone. You know about everyone, you want to be with everyone, and it feels like you are part of the family, which is insane. When you write, it's hard to kind of have that feel and to really make your audience love your characters that much. But Riordanverse is not like that. It's like you're tossed into this amazing world and you don't want to leave because every single character there is your best friend. And that's crazy. Usually there's someone that you hate, but almost all of Rick Riordan's characters have some part of them that makes you ache. And I don't want to go too far into detail about this one. So if you don't want this, I'm going to have a quick spoiler right here for about a minute. So if you want to skip ahead 1 minute from right now, the spoiler will probably be over. So I'm just warning you right now. Okay, so in this 1 minute, I'm going to dedicate to Luke Castellan. He is absolutely amazing. He is a character that I didn't think could be redeemed. I hated him so much at the beginning when he betrayed Percy. And I was like, oh my gosh, what did he do? Why are you doing this, Luke? And then he continues to do terrible things. But as soon as I realized that he was being mind controlled and that he wanted to get out, and then in the throne room, when you find out everything in The Last Olympian, and you're sitting there and you're contemplating it and you're in so much pain, you're like, oh my gosh, Luke is one of the best characters in this series. And I just absolutely love Luke. So I have to always put that plug in this, that Riordanverse, he knows how to turn bad characters around. Okay, I promised everyone that would only be a minute, and I timed it exactly. That was 1 minute. So we're back. This is back to non-spoiler. But yeah, Rick Riordan really knows how to pack a punch into every character that he has. And I know I've just talked about Percy Jackson, but I'm going to move on to Heroes of Olympus. So Heroes of Olympus immediately follows the events that happen in Percy Jackson. And the end of Percy Jackson, it has a very satisfying ending, but it does open up for a whole new series with a new prophecy. The new prophecy being that 7 half-bloods will answer the call to storm or fire, the world must fall, an oath to keep with final breath, and foes bear arms to the doors of death. That's the prophecy. And so it sets up another series. Now, you could stop reading it, but you most likely want to go along. In Heroes of Olympus, unlike Percy Jackson, it's told in third person, and in this series, it focuses more on Roman mythology, so it mixes Greek and Roman. So it keeps some of the same characters. You still have Percy, who is one of the main characters throughout this whole thing. And you still have Annabeth, who is Percy's love interest, and you still have a lot of the same world building and the same humor, same jokes, same everything. But Rick Riordan also grows with his audience, so he also puts a lot more darker topics into Heroes of Olympus, and personally, reading it, I loved it. I loved Heroes of Olympus so much. People say that they don't like that series. People say that they don't like what happened to Percy. They say The Son of Neptune is the worst book in the series. I completely disagree, and I know there'll probably be a bunch of angry comments about that, but I disagree. I think the Heroes of Olympus was Rick Riordan's way of opening up the world to more possibilities, to things that could really happen. And that's what's crazy, is that Percy Jackson is completely out there. Like, there's crazy things happening. There's monsters and people fighting with swords. But all in this, you just can remember that these people are real and that they're kids and that they are fighting for something that they believe in. And it feels so very real. And the struggles they have are very, very real. I apologize. My dog just knocked something over, but we're back now. But yes, Heroes of Olympus is definitely a bit more adult. It's still made for kids, but it has a lot more topics. But here's what's crazy about it, is that not only do we have Percy and Annabeth from the last series, we also have 5 new protagonists, and they all get screen time, which means there are 7 main characters. I have never in my life seen a series that has 7 main characters and that every single one of them has a story to tell. And every single one of them has a backstory. And it's only covered in 5 short books, which is incredible. There are authors who have one main character and they stick with that the whole time, and then they have a bunch of characters that come in and, associate with the main character, but never 7 main characters. And I just marvel at this ability to have that many main characters. Like, this is epic fantasy stuff, but in children's books. And this is what Riordanverse is all about. Remember how I said it's the journey you take? It is not about this random story that you're following. It is literally that you are placed among characters that are so incredibly interesting that you feel like you're a member of their group. That is what this series is about. The journey, the people you meet along the way. It's like life, but books, which is I just never have understood how amazing this concept is. And I hope that whoever watches this video will go out there right now and will pick up a book if you've never done it before, if you've never read a Rick Riordan book in your life. Please read one right now. Please. For me. I will be so happy. And then, please, spam the comments so hard right now. I don't care what you do. Normally, I don't like spam, but, please, put as many Rick Riordan things as you want to in those comments. It can be memes. It can be funny quotes that you absolutely adore. It can be sad things. Just please put a spoiler warning if it's a spoiler. That's all I ask. Tell me about how you love these books, because frankly, they are books that need to be loved and shared. I recently posted something on Goodreads, and it was a review for the Last Trials of Apollo book. But in a way, it was a review for every book that he had ever written. And I basically said the same thing. If you've never picked up The Lightning Thief, which is probably the one you should start with, just saying. If you've never picked up The Lightning Thief, do it right now. Just do. You're going to see that the first chapter is I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. And you're probably going to be pretty weirded out. But you will come to appreciate the weirdness and the love that is put into these books. That's another thing. You can feel it. Everywhere. Everywhere in the books, there is something for you, the reader. And there are characters that you're going to want to hug and hold. And that's really what it's about. So please, this is me asking, read it. Anyway, we've veered off track a lot, but essentially we've covered Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus. Heroes of Olympus, again, more adult. It also has a slightly different storyline. Basically, it's a different quest, but it's one quest that spans across 5 books instead of a bunch of little quests like Percy Jackson is. In a way, Percy Jackson sets up the thrill of what a quest is and helps you as a reader understand what a quest is before it throws you into Heroes of Olympus, which is one big quest. Moving on, Trials of Apollo is what immediately follows after this. Basically, at the end of Heroes of Olympus, something happens to Apollo, and Apollo is made immortal. If you don't know, Apollo is one of the Greek gods. He is the god of the sun, the god of medicine, the god of music. He's also the god of a lot of other things, but those are pretty much his main things. Keep in mind that if you start yelling at me and you're like, Natalie, there is another god who was the god of the sun. Actually, it was not a god. His name is Helios, and he is a titan. Big difference. Anyway, so basically Apollo is thrown onto Earth, and he has to figure out things as a mortal. And in a way, this series kind of sums up what Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus were trying to teach us. That, sure, life is hard, life sucks sometimes, life can be confusing, which is the case for pretty much every person. It's shown more through the demigods, and Riordan can really make it seem harder and really amp up the drama, but it's true for every single one of us, that life is a little bit hard sometimes, but in the end, it's all worth living. And I feel like I just need to put that out there, that seriously, life is beautiful. And if you're one of those people right now who are looking at the world and saying, why is the world the way it is? And why do I have to live this life? And why am I thrown all of these difficulties? Read Trials of Apollo. Please, do it. You will thank me later. When you get to that last Trials of Apollo book, you'll understand, and you'll be very happy. I must say, I have learned a lot from Riordanverse, so I hope you will also learn stuff too. Now, there are also those 2 other series I was talking about that are part of Riordanverse at the moment. Those are Magnus Chase and the Kane Chronicles. I'm going to talk about Magnus Chase first because I absolutely adore it, maybe more than Percy Jackson. Magnus Chase is kind of like the teenager Percy Jackson. Percy's like 12 at the beginning of Percy Jackson. Magnus is already 16, and he has some things to say. This is not a spoiler. Well, it's like a minor spoiler, but it doesn't really matter. Magnus dies within the first 10 pages of Magnus Chase, which is hilarious. And if anybody knows anything about Norse mythology, basically he lives in Valhalla. And they fight every single day, battles, and he dies every single day. And it's absolutely hilarious. It's terrible. You don't want to live that kind of life, but it's hilarious. And Magnus throws a whole new wave of amazingness and hilariousness to everything. And for all those Marvel fans out there who love the Norse mythology and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, here's your throw out now. You can learn so much more about the real mythology in Rick Riordan's Magnus Chase. There's your plug. Have fun with that. On the flip side of this, the Kane Chronicles is about Egyptian mythology, and it's not exactly slower, but in a way it is a little bit slower in that a way that it develops the world and talks about the Egyptian mythology and the different relationships of the characters and how they're fighting. It is also the shortest series of all of these, as it is only 3 books. The rest are 5 books. Percy Jackson is 5, Heroes of Olympus is 5, Trials of Apollo is 5, and also Magnus Chase is 3. So the 2 spin-off series are 3 books. So I should mention that, is that they're shorter. But I believe that the Kane Chronicles are probably one of the shortest, as well as page length. I could be wrong about that, don't quote me. But it seems to move a little bit, like it's a slower paced book, but it seems to move quickly, and it's kind of over quickly, which is fine. But it was my introduction to Percy Jackson and the Riordanverse, and I must say, those books are incredible, and they follow 2 siblings, which again, 2 main characters is also very hard to accomplish, which is amazing. Props to you, Rick Riordan. But it follows Sadie and Carter, their brother and sister, and they do a lot of stuff together and go on quests and whatnot, so it's pretty cool as well. Anyway, that's pretty much everything that falls under the domain of Riordanverse. There are also a bunch of books that are just singles that you can get that are about different characters. I know that I've talked a lot on Pinterest about the Demigod Diaries. Strongly recommended if you're already a Percy Jackson fan. If you're not, read Percy Jackson first, then read the Demigod Diaries, and you will feel a lot of heartache, but it's worth it. Basically, these series, they have provided me with so much wisdom. I feel there's a lot to be learned in the books. I think the lessons in these books can be applied to a lot of what is in life and a lot of what we live through, and I don't feel like these books are something that just should be taken for granted. There's something that can be learned from, and you can really find something that you enjoy in every single book. And I feel like that's really important for a big fandom as this. I will conclude this by saying that Riordanverse is a fandom. The Percy Jackson fandom is probably the biggest fandom I'm a part of, aside from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. At its core, the Riordanverse fandom is mostly about the fans that keep it up, even though Riordan does an amazing job of making it so that fans love it. And as I said, the characters feel like friends, and the setting is somewhere that you really want to be, and the books themselves are not really books. They are an adventure that you partake upon. I've never felt the way I do when I've read a Riordan book. It's very much like you are there as part of the journey, and I feel like you don't get that in some books. Sometimes you feel a little bit distant from the world and you're not completely immersed, but in Riordan, it's not like that. It's more so that you are partaking on the journey with the characters. And I feel like that's just such a special thing, because you can learn with them, you can cry with them, you can laugh with them, and you can really be a part of the world. And so you're not really investing in just a series of books. You're investing in a world that cares about you and that is amazing. And I just really, really want to specify that Riordanverse is not like any other fandom. It's very different. I mean, it's crazy sometimes. After all, we do ship swords because Magnus Chase is amazing. But we also really find beauty in different things of life. And so please come join us. We have blue cookies because blue is the best color for food. And also, we have amazing monster fights and swords and a really great dining room that's outdoors. We have great stuff. So you should come and join us in Camp Half-Blood and come join the Riordanverse fandom, because we want you. and we want to invite you into our amazing camp. So please come join us, eat your blue cookies, and have a great day, everyone.